Hi there, young artists. It's Mr. Scholten here again today. And today we're going to do something a little unique and interesting. We are going to be celebrating Earth Day by using recycled materials. We are going to create this owl with things that you found in your recycling. Here's what today is going to look like. We're first going to draw together our owl. And then we're going to practice collage, which is cutting and pasting different materials found in your recycling bin to make this owl. Here's what you're going to need today. You will need a pencil, a permanent marker, scissors, glue, and a lot of different cardboard boxes from your recycling. Gather your materials and come join me. All right, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to want a scissors, some glue, and a pencil. We're actually going to start by creating a template so that we can trace and cut all the shapes we need to make our owl. As you can see here, once again, this is the owl we are going to be creating, and it's made up of lots of smaller shapes. And so what we're going to do first is we are going to draw our owl on a piece of scratch cardboard. I chose this cardboard. It's a goldfish cardboard. I have several of these actually in my recycling, so I'm using this as my scrap because I don't particularly need this for any part of my owl. I'm going to go ahead and use this to draw my owl on. So we're going to draw together. I would like you to draw in pencil. I'm going to draw in a permanent marker so you can see my drawing just a little bit better. To start out with, we're going to draw the body of our owl, and to do that, I'm going to draw a nice large U shape on my paper. I'm going to start close to the top. I'm going to curve down, around, and back up just like this. And you can tell that the U shape here is kind of pinched at the top. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw just a smile face right here at the top of my owl. This kind of represents the horns here of our great horned owl. The next thing I'm going to do is create a line of symmetry. Now, a line of symmetry is a line in any shape that represents that that shape is the same on both sides. So, for example, if I use this glue bottle here, I could draw a line of symmetry right down the center of my glue bottle to show that this side of my glue bottle is the reflection of this side of my glue bottle. I could not draw a line of symmetry this way because the bottom of my glue bottle does not reflect the top of my glue bottle. We are going to create a line of symmetry in our template here so that we can create equal-sized shapes for our owl. I'm going to come up here and just draw a straight line right down through the middle. And once again, this is going to be our template. So eventually, we will not be seeing this line here at all. It won't be part of our finished project. Next, I'm going to draw a nice large circle that goes from my line of symmetry all the way out to the outside of my owl and back towards the center. I'm going to repeat that on the opposite side of my line of symmetry. Now, again, I'm going to come back in here and draw a smaller circle. This smaller circle is going to be like the iris of our owl's eye, or the colored part of the eye. And even smaller still, I'm going to draw a third circle. This circle represents the pupil. Our owl also needs a beak, and we can use our line of symmetry to help us create this beak. I'm going to start here on my eyeball. I'm going to go down to the point, just like that. And then I'm going to draw a line that its reflection over on the other side. Now our owl has a beak. Another thing we want to add to our owl is wings. So I'm going to draw the letter C over on this side, and then I'm going to draw its reflection on the opposite side. Again, over here I'm going to draw a diagonal line, and I'm going to draw its reflection on the opposite side. To finish our wings, I'm going to draw 1, 2 lines going in the opposite direction, or perpendicular, to the line we just drew. Now we have an owl with eyes, a beak, and feathers. We still have to create our feet and our tail feathers. So if we come down here from the bottom of our feathers, we're going to draw 1, 2, 3 bumps just like that. And 1, 2, 3 bumps just like that. These are going to be our talons, or the owl's feet. Then I'm going to draw my owl's tail. I'm going to draw a curved line that comes down and over, and it's going to curve back up on the opposite side, like a reflection. Again, I'm going to create some tail feathers just by drawing these lines in here. Now we've created our template. We're actually going to use this, cut it up, and trace this onto the different colored cardboards you found in your recycling. All right, before we get started doing any cutting or tracing, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the recycling items you might find. I want you to think about if the things that you like have really big shapes, or if the shapes are pretty small, or the areas are pretty small of color. For example, this is a pretty small piece of recycling, and I love this color blue, but there's not a lot of details that I can use in my owl with this material. So I want to think about what are some of the smaller shapes I can use to use my favorite color and still be able to use it with the materials. Like I said, this is going to have to be much smaller. Maybe it could be the details in the feathers or the circles in the eyes. Okay, those would both be great options for this piece of paper here. Also consider patterns and basic colors. Right here we have a really fun pattern all over this piece of cardboard, and I plan on using this in my project. I love this gingham pattern here. It's going to make my owl look really cool. But this is pretty busy here, and so I might not want to use this area here. Also, you may want to consider pairing up really kind of patterned, fun, exciting, colorful boxes with some plainer colors and shapes. Okay, now that we've gone through some of our recycling items and made some choices about how we're going to arrange our pieces onto the cardboard, it's now time to start cutting and tracing our shapes. The first shape I want to work with is the very large shape of my owl's body. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut right along that outside line. This is a really great opportunity for you to practice your cutting skills. So cut nice and slowly. Make sure your hand and the paper is moving with these curves to get a nice clean line for your owl template. Okay, I'm going to use this first, but I'm going to keep this. I'm going to need it for my talons and my tail feathers. So I'm going to set this aside for now and use this. Alright, so for the body of my owl, I have found this piece of cardboard here in my recycling. And I really like how there's not a lot of contrast in this area. We have lots of dark colors and very minimal writing. And so this is going to be a great piece here for me to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my template down on top of that box in the area that I would like to cut for my owl. And I'm going to trace around my owl nice and carefully. Once again, I'm using a permanent marker so you guys can see what's happening here. Although it might be hard considering how dark my paper is. But if you can use a pencil, that'd be great. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and cut the body of my owl out. And when I do that, I'm going to cut actually just around the outside edge of the black line. This is going to help when we start pairing some of those different colors and patterns together. Having a bit of a black edge around everything is really going to help clarify exactly what each shape is supposed to represent. One thing I like to do is something called bubble cutting, which is just kind of getting the shape cut out first. And then once all that extra paper is gone, I can come back and once again continue cutting. And like I said, I'm cutting along the outside of that line so that I have a thin black line around my owl when I'm done. Here I have the body of the owl I will be creating out of this kind of red and black paper. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding the different shapes for my eyes. So I'm going to come back to my owl template and I'm going to cut out that big circle for my owl's eye. And because our owl is symmetrical, we really only need to cut out one of these eyes to trace. So choose your favorite circle to trace. Go ahead and put your template aside. Now we need to find a color or shape of cardboard that we are going to use for this big circle here. All right, so I found this box in our recycling and I really like it because it has some of those circular shapes we're going to be using for our eyes already in it, and there are two right next to each other, so I can pretty much keep this fairly symmetrical. So I'm gonna go ahead and place the template down onto my cardboard and trace. And I'm going to do that a second time over here. And I will cut both of those shapes out. Now remember, we don't want to toss this because we need to use the other two shapes in our template as well. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. Once again, I'm going to start by bubble cutting, getting these shapes cut out from the original box, taking away some of those larger pieces of paper so that I can get close and cut closer to those shapes. Once again, I'm cutting just around the outside of that black line. You may or may not be able to see this, but once again, that black line really kind of helps to separate each of the shapes, give each shape its own defined area, and allows those shapes to kind of speak for what they represent on our owl. Okay, now I can go ahead and I can glue these down to my owl. So I'm going to flip these over and apply my glue to the backs of these. Sometimes when we create collages, it's really hard to not use too much glue. We end up using way too much glue, and then we have kind of a mess on our paper. So I'm going to show you a trick that I tell my students as to not use too much glue. The glue bottle here is our bunny, and bunnies like to hop around the fence. Okay? Bunnies do not like to be squeezed. So we're not going to squeeze our bunny, but we're going to flip our bunny upside down, and we're going to let that bunny hop around the fence. Now, I'm adding little dots of glue all the way around the outside of my shape. And I really didn't squeeze. Since there's a lot of glue in this glue bottle, it doesn't take much squeezing to get glue out. Now I can go ahead and I can flip this over, glue it down to the area I want my eye to be, and I'm just going to kind of hold and press for a little while. Some of these cardboard pieces, they might have been folded, they might have been shoved into the bottom of your recycling and kind of crumpled. And so if we want the pieces to lay flat, we're going to have to hold them in place for a while just to let that glue set. And as you're gluing, you can do a self-check. Did you use too much glue? It's easy to tell if you've used too much glue by the amount of glue that's around the outside of your shape. There's really no glue around the outside of my shape, so I'm good to go. I used the right amount of glue. All right, now it's time to glue our next eye on. And once again, I'm going to hop like a bunny. I don't squeeze the bunny. I hop all the way around the fence. I have my little bunny tracks all the way around the fence, and I'm going to glue that down here. Once again, I'm going to hold, and while I'm holding, I can check. I have no glue around the edges. That means, once again, I used an appropriate amount of glue when gluing together my owl. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the iris, or the colored part of our eye. So I'm going to use my template once again, and I'm going to cut around that line here to make a smaller circle so I can make the iris for my owl. For my eye, I'm going to use this piece of cardboard that I found earlier. I told you I really like the colors in it. And there's not a lot of empty spaces here, but I can kind of use and work around some of those heavier colored spaces. And I'm going to find two empty or fairly empty spaces to trace around. I'm going to trace right here. And then I'm also going to trace right here as well. Okay, these are going to be the irises for our eyes. I'm going to set this aside for now. I'll need it for the center part, or the pupil of our eye. I'm going to go ahead and give this a cut. And once again, I'm just going to go ahead and start by doing a little bubble cutting, get all that excess off. It'll be easier for me to cut if I don't have all of that on there. Once again, I need two of these, but I can trace them with the same shape. That will once again help to make sure that our owl is fairly symmetrical. All right, now that I have my two circles, I'm going to repeat that gluing over again. I'm going to take my glue bottle, I'm going to hop like a bunny all the way around the fence, leave my little bunny tracks, and I'm going to glue my eye right kind of off center from this larger circle. This larger circle in my mind is maybe like the feathers that go around the eyeball, and this here itself is the actual eyeball. And then once I've held that in place for a little while, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to hop like a bunny all the way around the fence, leave my little bunny tracks, and glue that here on this side. Okay, once again, as I'm holding it down, I can check to see if I've used just enough glue or not enough glue. Once those are glued in place, I can come back to this piece here. Once again, I need that center circle for the pupil. So I'm going to go ahead and cut around that line. And what I'm going to look for next is maybe some paper that's fairly black or easy to work with, so that our pupil is going to be the darkest spot on our owl. For my pupils, I'm going to come back to my Coke box here. I've got lots of nice black space here, and so I'm just going to cut around that black area I want to use. That'll help me get rid of some of that extra paper I got sitting around and in front of me. And I'm going to trace twice. Now, once again, as you're working, it might be really hard for you to trace on black or be able to see what you've drawn on black. And so if that's the case for you, if that's something that you're having a hard time with, something you can do is just flip your paper over and you can trace on the back side of your paper for your pupils. We don't really need black lines around our black shape. There's really no need for it because it's already black. So we can flip that over and be able to see the lines we've traced on the back side of this paper here. Go ahead and cut those out. And then we can glue them down to the centers of our eyes, like our pupils. Once again, to glue them down, I'm just going to hop like a bunny. And hold. Double checking to make sure I didn't use too much glue. Okay, so now we've finished our eyes. The next thing we're going to do is move on to our beak. So if we pull back in our template that we drew on earlier, we're going to need to cut out the shape of our beak. And I would suggest that you look for something kind of light and bright, especially if you have a dark bird like I do. Earlier on the bird I showed you from earlier, I used the orange parts of goldfish boxes for the feet and the beak. Let's go ahead and cut out the shape of our beak. And I'm going to put my template aside for now and find a piece of cardboard for my beak. Okay, so for my beak, I am going to use the bread here from this Uncrustable as my beak. Like I said earlier, I want to find something that's kind of contrasting. I love that there's some texture in this, and I also love that it's really kind of bright. It's going to be a powerful component to our owl when it's complete. So I'm going to go ahead and trace. Once again, when I trace, I'm going to want to trace maybe with a Sharpie marker or a permanent marker so that I can get those lines in my finished work. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut a round shape. All right, bubble cut first. And I'm going to come back in and cut just around the outside of that black line. There, now I have my beak. And what I'm going to do with my beak is the same thing I've done with my other shapes, is I'm going to hop like a bunny. But the thing that's going to make this a little different is when I glue it down, I'm going to try to slip it down underneath the eyes here, if it's possible. If it's not possible, don't rip or break your bird. Okay, that wouldn't be fun. But if it's possible to fit underneath your eyes, it's a great way to layer your work. Oh, now I got some glue, so I just wipe that up. You can grab a paper towel to wipe yours out. There, now my bird has a beak. And you can really see how the beak of this bird is contrasting with the rest of the shapes on this bird because it's so light and bright and has such an interesting texture to it. The next thing I'm going to do is cut out my feet. If you remember, we set this shape aside here. I'm going to cut out my feet and use those for a template. Once again, I only need to cut out one of my 2 feet because we're going to make this owl symmetrical. I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to need this for my tail later. And I think I'm going to come back to this same really bright colored Uncrustable here for my feet. So I'm going to do the same thing I've done with all my other shapes here and trace it. And this shape is pretty small. It's probably going to be one of the smallest shapes I'm going to use. So you may want to trace really slow and make sure you have a good handle on that shape. All right, now I have 2 shapes to cut out for the feet. And I'm going to bubble cut around them first. And then I'm going to come back to cut them out, leaving just a little bit of that black showing. Now when you're ready, we're going to glue this down to our owl, but when you go to glue, it's going to be a little tricky because instead of gluing it on top of our owl's body, we're going to glue it underneath our owl's body. And so that's just going to require us to put a few dots of glue here on the top of my feet. Then I'm going to go ahead and slip that down underneath my owl, just like this. And I'm going to hold that in place. Once again, we need to hold that in place because our cardboard might be textured, it might have been folded or bent or crumpled in the recycling. So I can hold those in place, just like that, let them have a chance to set there just a little bit. The next thing we are going to be working on is adding our wings to our owl's bodies. So I'm going to come in over here and I'm going to grab my template. I'm going to find one of my wings to work with. Again, our bird should be somewhat symmetrical and it should be fairly easy just to take one of those wings and trace it twice. I like this wing the best. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to cut this wing out. And I'm going to find some sort of cardboard to cut. Now for our wings, we need 2 of this shape traced and cut. So like I said, I really liked this gingham pattern here on the Uncrustable box, and I'm going to use that for my owl. So I'm going to come over on this side, and I'm going to trace that once over here, trying to stay away as much as possible from any lettering. Okay, there you go. And then I'm going to repeat that over on the opposite side, but when I do that, I want to flip this over. Now this is really important because remember, when you have a line of symmetry, everything on one side is the reflection of the other side. So I'm going to flip this over so I get the reflection on the other side of my wing. Okay. Now I have 2 wings. They're fairly clean and free of any writing or anything like that. I love this pattern. I'm going to go ahead and cut around that black line. And before I glue these down, I'm going to add some decoration to these wings. As you can see here, I have some lines on there, and so there's a lot of different things we could do with our bird feathers to add some visual interest. One of the things I could do to add some visual interest to my wings is by using this shape up here to create an added visual element to my my wings here. And so I could add a slightly different color here up on the top. I could also use the bottom here and slightly change the bottom as well. Another thing I could do is, you can see here on the original owl I made, I actually cut my stencil out here and cut each of these shapes out. I cut each of these shapes and traced them onto different colored cardboards that I had from recycling, and then I glued them down separately. You can do this as well. It will create the effect that each feather is has its own visual interest. Okay, another way to create our own feathers visual interest is just by cutting up these lines here. Okay, you could bend and twist to give it some texture, give it some fold, and then each one is slightly textured here, giving it its own kind of space to work in, and it makes it look like the feathers are 3-dimensional. That's what I'm going to do on this owl here. I'm not going to cut out each shape and trace it. However, if that's something you want to do at home, you can totally do that at home. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it back down exactly where it was, just like that. And I'm going to cut right on those lines. There we go, there's this one. I'm going to match. I'm just going to cut while I'm holding them together. If you can't cut while you're holding them together, if it's too thick, you can ask an adult to help you. Now when I pull them away, I have my feathers here already, and I'm just going to bend and twist this to give it some texture, let them live in their own space. And then when I go to glue it down here, like that, I'm actually just going to glue along the top, like this. That way, those feathers can kind of move about freely and stay 3-dimensional even after I've glued it down to my bird. And then I'm going to repeat that one more time on this one here. There we go. All right. I'm going to cut here and here. Now when I flip it over, I'll have, once again, each of those feathers kind of separated. And the reason why I chose to do it on this one differently than I chose to do it on my primary example is because on my primary example, I had lots of really kind of fun colors where I'm really interested in this pattern here. And so I don't want to cover up the pattern with more cardboard. If I was using maybe a different cardboard, it might have been fun to cover it up and add some different colors. But for this cardboard, I really like the pattern. I don't want to cover it up. And so I'm just going to glue it down the way it is. Let that pattern shine. Our next step is to cut our tail feathers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to this piece here, and I'm just going to cut around our tail feather. Like this. This is going to be the template for my tail feather. Okay, now for my tail feather, I'm going to go ahead and use the gingham again. I'm fortunate enough to have enough of this pattern on my box to be able to repeat it. And one of the reasons why I like it is it creates unity. I'm kind of repeating the shapes and colors over again. The patterns are being repeated over again, and it creates unity within my piece. Another reason why I would like to use the gingham over again is because my tail feathers are feathers, as well as my wings are made up of feathers. And so by repeating the texture again, I'm telling the viewer that these are all feathers. They're all feathers that belong to the same owl. And luckily enough, this gingham here is just about the right size for my tail feather. So I'm going to go ahead and trace around the outside of my tail feather here. And I'm going to cut it out, leaving a little line around the outside. Just like that. Okay, and now just like I did with my wings, I can kind of treat my tail feather in the same way. I can start by cutting up some of these lines here. So I can kind of bend and fold them and give them their own space, make them look a little 3D, a little texture just by bending them a little bit here. Once again, if I wanted to, I could have done what I did earlier. I cut each of those tail feather shapes into smaller shapes, trace them and glued them down in a pattern. And once again, you can see here on this owl, I tried to create unity by repeating the colors in the tail feathers that I used in my wings as well. So once again, I'm still creating unity throughout my piece, even though I'm using a lot more color and pattern in this one. Once I've done that, I'm, just like my feet, gonna add a little bit of glue along this top line here. I'm gonna sneak this underneath our owl, and so I don't want to glue on the back because that's just going to glue it down to my table. Go ahead and put this down just like this, press and hold. I also want to make sure I kind of center that between my bird's feet here, just like that. Now as I'm holding this into place, as we're kind of finishing up, I want you to think about some of the things that you might find in your recycling. If you have bottles, or maybe you have some old Pringles cans, those would be really great options to use to help your owl stand up. Now this owl can be more sculptural. It can stand in a spot. All you'd have to do is glue a line of glue on the back of your owl, stick it to that Pringles can or your plastic bottle, and it creates a stand for your owl. Another thing that you could use is a top of milk jugs or milk cartons, and these would make really great eyes. So you could use them for the irises of your eyes here, and you could just glue the black circles in the centers as well. That's also something you could add. You could go out and you could find sticks and acorns. You could find other things that have fallen and kind of gone to the wayside in your backyard, and create some texture within your piece as well to add some visual interest to your work. Once again, you can add a stick to your owl. maybe that owl's sitting on the same stick here as this owl. And to make my owl stick to this stick, I did use some hot glue. So if your parents have a hot glue gun and they're willing to give you some help, they can run a line of hot glue along here. You can put your stick down over the top of your bird. Now I've got two birds on a stick. Okay, to finish up your owl, you can use lots of different materials to add extra flair to your work. For example, I've got metallic paint, I have paint pens. If you have oil pastels or gel pens, those would also work on this surface. If you created a very light colored owl, you could use permanent markers on here to add some details as well. I'm going to show you some different ways that you can add details to your owl if you would like. First, I'm going to start with my paint pen. I got this paint pen at a craft store. You could find them pretty much at any craft store. And I'm going to start just by adding the dots in the owl's eyes here. Okay, so I'm going to add a dot over on this side here, and I'm going to repeat it over on this side as well. This is one area where we don't necessarily want to be symmetrical. We're trying to create a light source, so we want it to look like the light is coming from one direction. If I put the dot here, it's going to make our owl look like it's crossing her eyes. So unless you want an owl with its eyes crossed, you may want to put those dots on the same side. I'm also going to create a highlight down here on the bottom of my owl by making a line and two dots. It might be hard for you to see it here in the video, but you can definitely see it here on this owl that I've made. Another way we can add visual interest to our owls is by using paint. So I grabbed this metallic paint here, and like I said, this shape here around our eyes is really meant for an extra set of feathers. So I thought I could add some straight lines coming from the center of my eyes to show that there's a texture of feathers here around my eye. And I can repeat that over on the other one. You could also use paint to add eyelashes to your bird. You could add designs or patterns into the feathers. You could paint the tips of the feathers gold. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that you could be using this paint for. And you could repeat the same exact ideas with oil pastels or different kinds of gel pens. Metallic gel pens would look really cool, especially on darker surfaces. So the sky's really the limit. Have fun and enjoy decorating your bird. Thank you so much for joining me today, creating your own recycled owl. Think about the artists that we talked about today. Take a chance to research their work and see how they're using recycled materials in different ways, and think about the message that they're trying to share with their viewer through the materials that they're using. Not only are they using recycled materials in a really fun, innovative way, but they're also bringing light to the amount of trash and debris that we have here in the world. I hope you've enjoyed creating a recycled owl with me, and I hope you think about how maybe you can continue to use recycled materials in your own work as an artist. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.